So hi class, we are on fourth lecture on borrowing today, and considering the current circumstances which are going on in the market related to the big companies under debts, I think this topic would be very relevant for discussion for today. We will identify what kind of borrowings a company can take and how is it categorized. So basically the categorization for borrowing happens on 2 to 3 categories. One would be basis the term for which the borrowing is done. Second could be the security which has been provided for the borrowing. So it can be a secured borrowing or it can be unsecured borrowing. Third can be it can be a syndicated borrowing. We will discuss it at length. What is a syndicated borrowing? Another would be a bilateral borrowing. We are going to discuss that as well. And then depending upon the parties who have given us this funding, either it can be private borrowing or it can be a public borrowing. So let's discuss this one by one. The first one is the long-term borrowing. What can be termed as a long-term borrowing would be depending upon the term for which you are taking this borrowing and also the purpose for which you are putting this money, like what is the usage of money you are doing. So long term means, as the term suggests, it would be somewhere between 5 years or more. It can be termed as long term in that case. Again, you are basically taking this money to finance your projects, new projects which the company plans to undertake. So for example, the company which is in news right now has taken several borrowings to finance several new projects that they had, and then making big purchases like purchase of property, plant, machinery, equipment. If the company is into infrastructure, definitely they are in need of lot of borrowings. So generally long-term borrowing is made against charged on the fixed assets of the company. So obviously the person who is giving you this kind of money will also ask for certain kind of security. And long-term borrowings are generally secured borrowings because the the person who has lended you money also feels that there should be certain security which should be given to him, and the security is generally created on the fixed assets of the company. Next would be the short-term borrowing. So short-term borrowing, again, as the name suggests, it would be a very short period of, say, maybe up to 1 year or so. Generally, it is done to finance the working capital requirements of the company. The third would be medium-term borrowing, which is again, it's a medium between long-term and short-term. So 1 year to 5 years ka loan will be termed as a medium-term borrowing. Again, this is generally done by like commercial banks, normally finance purchase of land, machinery, vehicles. So this will fall under the category of medium-term borrowing. Next, we discussed was secured borrowing and unsecured borrowing. So definition wise, as simple as it sounds, so a debt obligation is considered secured if creditors have recourse to the assets of the company on a proprietary basis or otherwise ahead of general claims against the company. So somewhere, like if the company has defaulted in the payment of this kind of borrowing, the creditor can go ahead, sell the property of the company and get his money back. That is what is called as a secured borrowing. The other one, which is unsecured borrowing, will be it basically comprises of financial obligations where creditors do not have any kind of recourse to the assets of the company or on a proprietary basis or any other basis. So they do not have any rights on the assets of the company in case it's a unsecured borrowing. While giving unsecured borrowing, so tomorrow you are going to be company secretaries. While deciding whether the company wants to go for a secured borrowing, unsecured borrowing, please keep these things in mind. The next one is the syndicated borrowing. Syndicated borrowing is basically if a borrower requires a large or sophisticated borrowing facility. This is commonly provided by a group of lenders. So syndicated parties, it would not be like one party which is financing the company, it would be syndicated. Syndicated means together few parties are coming together to give this kind of money to the company. The borrower uses one agreement covering the whole group of banks and different types of facility rather than entering into a series of separate loans, each with different terms and conditions. So instead of having separate agreements with each of the party, the company tries to have one agreement which would be a syndicated agreement. It is called as a syndicated agreement. The next one is the bilateral borrowing. So bilateral borrowing is, as the name suggests again, refers to a borrowing made by a company from a particular bank financial institution. Again, in this type of borrowing, there is a single contract between the company and the lender. So that is what you call as a bilateral. So it will be a bilateral agreement. It will be an agreement between two parties. Next would be private borrowing. So companies bank loan type obligations whereby the companies take loan from a bank or financial institution. It can be called as a private borrowing, where companies where a company is approaching a bank and taking a loan from them. Very simple, like what even like for you and me, if we are going to start some project and we need some extra money, we may approach a bank for a loan. Depending upon our documentation, the bank will decide whether to give us a loan or no. The next one will be public borrowing. Again, in terms of Indian companies, a very common scenario wherein SEBI has also come up with lot of regulations for this kind of public borrowing because lot of public interest is involved in this. So is a general definition covering all financial instruments that are freely tradable on a public exchange or over the counter with a few, if any, restrictions, that is debentures, bonds. So when the companies are borrowing through the debentures and bonds, it may be termed as a public borrowing. Next is